888-SAY-ESPN is the telephone number. 888-729-3776 is our telephone number if you want to be part of the program. And ESPN Radio, as always, is presented by Progressive Insurance, making it easy to bundle your home and car insurance. And we might as well get right to it here on this busy Tuesday. Time for some Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Talk Wireless. Best phones, best networks, and no contracts. We just got word, I would say within the last 10, 15 minutes or so, and it's a story that you know was going to have some legs all throughout this offseason until it was resolved in the National Football League. And we're talking about the saga of Antonio Brown and the Pittsburgh Steelers and his future in the National Football League. Well, Antonio Brown, this is just a little after 12:30 in the afternoon, East Coast time, on his Twitter feed, says, "Thank you, Steeler Nation, for a big 9 years. It's time to move on and forward." So he's saying his goodbyes to the franchise, to the organization, the only one that he has known in his time in the entire National Football League. And look, it's really no surprise, right? I mean, everybody from the Pittsburgh Steelers organization, whether it be Kevin Colbert, the general manager, Mr. Rooney, the owner, everybody on down, you kind of had the idea that Antonio Brown had already played his last game as a Steeler when he walked out on the team going into week number 17 of the regular season last year. His team still with a pulse to make the playoffs, and then you had the disagreement and whatnot in practice, and they just said, you know what, don't even bother showing up. He showed up, he left at halftime of the Week 17 game. You knew that Antonio Brown pretty much made his bed when it came to the Pittsburgh Steelers moving forward, and he wasn't going to be part of the solution any further. But now you have yourself a very, very capable player. A guy who is one of the best, if not the best, wide receivers in all the National Football League. And let's be honest, a difference maker. A difference maker. He can help your team. He is as dynamic a playmaker in a league full of them that you have right now playing in the National Football League. Our own Adam Schefter tweeted out moments ago. Just a little further more context on this story. That Antonio Brown has not been traded, nor has he been released. But Brown wants a trade, and he officially has requested that from the Steelers. He's gone. Okay, he's not going to be a Pittsburgh Steeler any longer. And if you're talking about salary cap ramifications and what it means for the football team, if the Steelers go ahead and make the trade, he's got a $21.12 million prorated signing bonus that the Steelers are going to be hit for with their salary cap if this goes through. They're only essentially saving about $1 million if he's no longer on the team. Now, what do you get if you trade for Antonio Brown? What's the price tag going to be if you bring an Antonio Brown onto your team? You got to figure you're going to part with at least a first-round pick. That's a starting point. That's just going to begin the conversations and then some. But is it really worthwhile? You know, you can ask yourself the question, and I think it's a legitimate one. In this day and age where, yes, I know that it's a passing league. Yes, I know that offense is, generally speaking, going to win out more often than not, even though we saw a Super Bowl that was the lowest scoring in the history of the game. But more often than not, you need to score points, and the NFL has become an explosive entity. So is it really worthwhile to give up the farm to bring Antonio Brown onto your football team? I mean, it's a legitimate question. Does he make you better? Absolutely. But is it really worth giving up whatever the asking price is going to be in a trade, and then also what you're ultimately going to be hit with on your salary cap? Still under contract for a few more years. Still going to have to pay that. And I'm sure that in some way, shape, or form, he might want the contract dealt with. Maybe he's not even happy with what he's getting paid with right now, even though he just signed a contract a couple of years ago. You know how these guys are. It seems like on any given day they want to change it up. Some guy's making more than me. This guy just got an extension. I need to be taken care of now. Does it really benefit you to have a full-fledged, top-flight wide receiver on your team? Is that conducive to winning yourself a championship? I mean, look at the New England Patriots. Okay, they're the Super Bowl champions. I know there's been a lot of talk about Julian Edelman, who was the game MVP, and oh my goodness, we need to put him in the Hall of Fame now just because he's got a Super Bowl MVP. Pump the brakes on that. But what Super Bowl have the New England Patriots won out of the 6 where they had themselves a dynamite, bona fide, surefire, stud wide receiver? Really haven't. Really haven't. You know, when you have the good quarterback like Tom Brady, you're able to make guys like Edelman, like Amendola, who I know wasn't there this year, but the Chris Hogans of the world, and on and on and on. You can make those guys successful if you have a good quarterback. Okay, all those playmakers that the Los Angeles Rams had on their team, how did they function in the big game? How did that work out for them necessarily? You know, you look at a guy, we have this conversation a lot in New York when it comes to the New York Giants and Odell Beckham. You know, Odell Beckham is a dynamic playmaker. This is a guy who clearly is one of the more talented players at his position in the NFL. And he's always the center of attention, it seems like. But what if the New York Giants won with Odell Beckham on their roster? I'll tell you what, not a heck of a lot. So it begs the question, is it really worthwhile to bring Antonio Brown onto your football team? You know, should I give up precious draft capital if I have it just to bring this guy on? Well, what if I don't have a stable quarterback situation, number one? What if my offensive line is in tatters? What if I have holes all throughout the rest of my football team where, okay, if I bring on Antonio Brown, that makes me better in one sense, but I still have several other holes on my team that's going to prohibit me from winning a championship. It takes more than just one guy. We're not talking about a quarterback here. The quarterback is the true difference maker more often than not. And an Antonio Brown, an Odell Beckham, a Julio Jones, whatever top wide receiver you want to name in this sport, they're only going to be as good as the guy giving them the football. That's it. And you know what? A lot of Antonio Brown's success over the years, that has to be attributed to one Ben Roethlisberger. I think he deserves some of that credit. And clearly now, without having Antonio Brown, it's going to put more on Big Ben's shoulders because he might be losing Le'Veon Bell as well. And he didn't even have him all of last year. You know, that's another whole conversation that I think that we can delve into here. What about the Pittsburgh Steelers? Where do they go from here? Okay, they were able to function and have themselves, I guess you could say, a decent season last year without Le'Veon Bell. You know, James Conner had a heck of a year filling the void, but they still missed out on the postseason. And then they had the Antonio Brown thing blow up in their face at the end when it mattered most, and now he wants to move on from the franchise. Right, they have some other guys there at the position. You know, Juju Smith-Schuster really came into his own and became one of the top playmakers, really, I think, in all the AFC. You think you're going to get yourself some nice capital in return in whatever trade it might net you, and then you're going to free up possibly, some open spaces there on your field for other guys to come in and make a contribution. The one thing about a team like the Pittsburgh Steelers, the one thing you say about organizations like that is that they know what they're doing more often than not. They know how to build a winner. Okay, they get these guys, whether it be in the draft, even in the mid to later rounds, and they develop them into playmakers. You know, when Antonio Brown was drafted, he wasn't somebody that we could term necessarily a surefire can't-miss prospect, could we? Same thing goes for Le'Veon Bell. They took a flyer on a James Conner. Juju Smith-Schuster, they've developed him into a very quality player. So it's more about getting football players, bringing them into that program, and developing them from there on out. That's the key. And the successful organizations, starting right at the top with the New England Patriots, they're able to do that. How much roster turnover do the New England Patriots have on a year-in, year-out basis? A heck of a lot, it seems. But they've got the quarterback. They've got the head coach, they've got the system in place, and it doesn't matter if they lose coordinators, it doesn't matter if they lose Pro Bowlers, they just fill the void, next man up, the next man up mentality, which you hear spoken a lot about in the National Football League. A lot of teams preach that. Because nowadays with the salary cap, you can't keep all of your guys. You have to make tough decisions. You have to say goodbye to guys that have been good for you for a very long time. But if you can't pay everybody, that's why the draft is so important. And that's why bringing in young talent, young controllable talent, that's the key to building a winner long term. Yes, you need the quarterback. Yes, it'd be great to get yourself an impact pass rusher, a couple of playmakers here and there. But really, in my opinion, the quarterback is the one position in the National Football League and professional football nowadays that you can ill afford to live without if you want to be a consistent winner. So Antonio Brown is going to be out there now for all takers. Those that have the salary cap space, those that have a package that's going to be accommodating enough for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Question you got to ask yourself, if you are one of those teams, if you fit into that category, is that somebody that you want to bring in? Is that somebody that you want to bring onto your football team? Yeah, he's a heck of a player. Absolutely, he's a heck of a player. Difference maker. But he also brings a heck of a lot of other components as well. He's got some baggage. I mean, earlier this morning, before we even saw the tweet about him wanting to be traded, failed to show up for a court appearance to where he had to go and answer to driving 100 miles an hour. There was a domestic report that came out just the other day involving Antonio Brown. These are things now that you may have to get into bed with if you bring him onto your team. Because you know what? If you make the commitment, if you give up, let's say, several draft picks, some may even be first rounders, you bring the guy onto your football team, you take that contract on, you bring him into your program, and let's just say something goes wrong. You know, he gets into trouble or something happens where he's going to be suspended and he's not going to be on the field. If you're that team that gave up all that stuff, you don't get it back, right? I mean, you don't have a receipt where you can take it back and say, okay, this ain't working out. I want my draft picks back. It doesn't go like that. You know, the Oakland A's, they wasted a first-round pick, a top 10 pick in the MLB draft last summer for Kyler Murray. Now he decides he wants to go play football. The A's don't get that pick back, unfortunately. Major League Baseball doesn't mail them a compensatory pick and say, all right, guys, you got an extra first-rounder in the upcoming draft in June for next year. Doesn't work that way. So that's something you have to think long and hard about. I'm not sitting here and disputing the fact that he's a talented player. He's a great player. Might be the best wide receiver in the National Football League. But I'll ask you the question again. The Pittsburgh Steelers, who had a heck of a lot of talent on that team over the last decade, since Antonio Brown has been there, a lot of talent on that football team. What did they win with him on the roster? What did they win? How many Lombardi trophies were delivered because of Antonio Brown? Tell me that. Odell Beckham again with the Giants. How many Super Bowl trophies were he responsible for that the Giants have? They've got 4 of them in their trophy case there in East Rutherford, New Jersey. None of them are because of Odell Beckham. He's got 1 playoff game. 1. You know, Julio Jones went to a Super Bowl. They blew a 28-3 lead. Didn't win it. So buyer beware is all I'm saying. I know the salary cap keeps going up. I know that there's more money to spend when you're talking about the National Football League. But if you really want to give all of it to a wide receiver, I think you got to think long and hard about this one, especially a guy like Antonio Brown now who's got some baggage. You have to think long and hard about that. You know, Mike Tomlin had no problem. Think about that. And Mike Tomlin knows him as good as anybody. He's coached him his whole career, right? But Mike Tomlin had no problem, and this is a bottom line business, remember, where everybody does everything humanly possible to try to win. Because winning means you keep your job, you keep getting your contract extensions. I mean, we just saw this whole thing yesterday in the uproar over Kareem Hunt signing with the Cleveland Browns. And how dare they do that, right? But you sign him because he's a damn good football player. And he's going to help us win football games. So Mike Tomlin, going into Week 17, when they had an opportunity, or they needed to at least win to keep their season afloat, and then some, he had no issue whatsoever telling Antonio Brown, arguably his best player on offense, told him, you know what? Don't even bother suiting up. Don't even bother suiting up. So if the Steelers could say that, you think I'm going to be lining up to give them maybe 2 first-round picks and then some for this guy? When we know that he was a divisive presence in the locker room? That's a tough ask, don't you think? That is a very difficult sell if you ask me. But somebody's going to roll the dice on him. And I still think that he's got a lot of good football left. Remember, this day and age in the NFL, you have a longer shelf life than maybe wide receivers back in the day did. If you take care of your body the right way, if you stay relatively injury-free, you're going to be able to be productive for a few more years. And I think that he will be. But it is going to be it's not a slam dunk. And normally when you have a player of his talent and that ability, it should be a slam dunk. But that's not the case when you're talking about Antonio Brown. Remember, want to hear from you at 888-SAY-ESPN, 888-729-3776. Dan Graca on the Stephen A. Smith Show here on ESPN Radio and ESPN News. And there's a lot of stuff swirling around with the National Football League, too. I mentioned Kyler Murray, and we're going to get into him as well because I think that's a fascinating situation when you talk about what could potentially lie ahead for him in the NFL draft. We know we got the Combine coming up next week from Indianapolis. Fantastic, right? You could start to sniff already next season with the Combine. And I know it's not for everybody. It's a bunch of guys in T-shirts and shorts running around and, high jump, long jump, 40-yard dash, that type of thing. I get it. And the true determination of a player isn't going to be what they do in T-shirt and shorts. Wait till they put the helmet on. Wait till they put the pads on before we know if they can cut it or not on the next level. But the thing I like about the Combine is that it's a few weeks before the start of the new calendar year in the NFL. Then you're going to have free agency. Then you're going to have player movement. You could already start to begin the process of already looking ahead to next year. And now Kyler Murray is going to be a name that when you're starting to forecast the draft and where these quarterbacks could potentially go, now he factors into the equation in a big way. We know what Cliff Kingsbury, the new coach of the Arizona Cardinals, the comments he made way back when about, boy, if I was running the show and I had my druthers, Kyler Murray would be the number one pick in the draft. I'd move heaven and earth to make sure he would be the guy. Well, now Cliff Kingsbury is sitting there as the coach of the Arizona Cardinals, and he has the number one pick in the draft, and Kyler Murray is going to be part of this draft. But what do you do if you're Cliff Kingsbury and the Arizona Cardinals? Because you just drafted a quarterback in the first round last year by the name of Josh Rosen, and he didn't exactly wow in his first year, but you know what? It's not all his fault. The Cardinals were a bad football team last year. That's why they have the number one pick right now, and Cliff Kingsbury didn't draft him. It was the previous regime, even though Steve Keim, general manager, was still there. He's the one who turned in the card ultimately. So the organization probably still has some high hopes for Josh Rosen. But now you have a new man in charge, and Kingsbury was hired more so than anything for his offensive acumen, right? He has that Big 12-type background, which is exactly where Kyler Murray came from. And Kyler Murray won a Heisman Trophy playing quarterback for the Oklahoma Sooners. And I don't think it's a secret to say that if you've watched the NFL, save for maybe Super Bowl 53, I mean, the NFL is almost morphing into the Big 12, right? More often than not, defense isn't really a premium, at least not what it used to be, and you have these teams going up and down the field in the passing game. So a guy like Kyler Murray, who, maybe with socks on is a shade over 5'9", at least according to the experts, maybe a quarterback of his stature back in the day wouldn't have the opportunity to be successful. There would probably be a lot of teams in the NFL who would be reluctant to make that big of an investment on a guy who's on the diminutive side. But we've seen others have success now. Russell Wilson isn't exactly 6'5". He's been successful. He's one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL. Drew Brees is probably just a shade over 6 feet, and he's forged a Hall of Fame career. Baker Mayfield, right? Baker Mayfield. Do you remember what the talk was about Baker Mayfield last year leading up to the draft? Throughout the entire process, people were saying if Baker Mayfield were only a few inches taller, he'd be the number one pick in the draft. But I don't know if I can make that type of commitment to a guy who's, about 6'1", generously? Until Baker Mayfield became the first pick in the draft, that is. So while everybody is casting doubts upon Kyler Murray now that he's not big enough and he's not going to be successful enough because he's only 5'9", well, it's only February. We still have over 2 months until the NFL draft actually commences. And between now and then, a lot could happen. You have the Combine. You have individual meetings. Remember, it wasn't until, I'm trying to think back, maybe a few weeks before the draft last year, where all of a sudden you started to hear these rumblings about Baker Mayfield. And that maybe, just maybe, he might end up being the guy now shooting up the draft board. And Cleveland was going to take him with the first overall pick in the draft until they did. So the same thing might happen here with Kyler Murray. Now, do I think that he'll be the number one pick right now? Okay, in the middle of February? I'll probably say no. Do I think he's a first-round pick? Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do, because I know the world that we're living in right now in the NFL. And you need a quarterback. You need a franchise difference maker. And I think with some of the concepts and with some of the offenses that you certainly have seen more ingrained in this league over the last several years, guys like Kyler Murray at least now have a foundation to be successful. I don't know if he's a day one starter walking right in, but he's going to have an opportunity to see the field, I think, in the next couple of years. And that really, to me, is what probably swayed him more than anything else. And look, I can't get inside his head. I don't know if this is true or not. But when he was going back and forth about, do I play baseball, do I play football, all anybody wants to do is an athlete. I don't care if you're a pro. I don't care if you're in high school. I don't care if you're in Little League, right? Because not all of us ended up being professional athletes. All you want to do is play. All you want to do is have an opportunity to prove yourself. And I think if you weigh the two, if you're Kyler Murray, you get a better opportunity to get on the football field faster in the NFL than he would if he was playing baseball. There were no guarantees that he would have been able to shoot through the minor league system for the Oakland A's. What if he was struggling hitting the baseball? What if he was having a hard time hitting breaking stuff and chasing pitches outside the plate? That's a realistic possibility. In between, he'd be riding buses and having to go through the low levels of the minor leagues. Just because you're a first-round pick, if you're not performing, you don't get the call-up. It's as simple as that. On the NFL, on the other hand, if you're a first-round pick as a quarterback, and even if you don't start from day one, more often than not, you are going to get your opportunity in some way, shape, or form to see what you can do in real game situations. Not talking about preseason. Remember last year, Lamar Jackson was the last pick of the first round, right? He didn't start day one. He had a former Super Bowl MVP ahead of him with the Baltimore Ravens. But eventually, the Ravens' offense became stagnant. They went to the bullpen. They tapped Lamar Jackson on the shoulder, middle of the season, and he took off from there. And yeah, the financials are a big part of this whole thing, too. I mean, think about it. Even if you are the last pick in the first round in 2019 in the NFL draft, all right, let's just say Kyler Murray is, even though I don't think that's going to be the case. But even if you're the last pick in the round, you're still going to be taking home probably in the neighborhood of $10 million in guaranteed money. $10 million. That's a nice chunk of change. You're not getting $10 million right when you sign if you're a Major League Baseball player. You saw what the contract he got right off the bat for the Oakland A's was. And who's to say he was going to be able to make it to the major leagues, to where he would be able to have a successful career and then possibly in turn earn upwards of that $10 million. I think it's a no-brainer. Yes, there's inherent injury risk, short-term, long-term, I get it. Football's a more violent, more of a contact sport than, let's say, baseball is. But he's giving himself the best chance to be successful. And we're going to spend a lot of time over the next 2 months debating whether or not he's going to be a good pro quarterback and whether or not you should invest a high draft pick in him. Are we talking about a guy who's top 5 material? And if you're a team like the New York Jets now, sitting there with the 3rd overall pick in the draft, and you do not need a quarterback because you picked Sam Darnold last year, that just makes your situation a little bit more tempting to all the other teams behind you. Because now if you're Mike McCagnon, the GM, maybe the phone's going to be ringing a little bit more if a team falls in love with Kyler Murray. 888-SAY-ESPN is the telephone number, 888-729-3776. That is Straight Talk Wireless, nationwide coverage on America's largest and most dependable 4G LTE networks. When you're hiring, you don't want to waste time sorting through dozens of irrelevant resumes. You want an efficient way to a short list of qualified candidates. That's why you need Indeed.com. Post a job in minutes, set up screener questions based on your job requirements, then zero in on qualified candidates using an intuitive online dashboard. Discover why 3 million people say ESPN is our telephone number, 888-729-3776. You can find me on Twitter at Dan Graca, Graca. And you know what? There's still some time to get a gorgeous Valentine's bouquet of roses from 1-800-Flowers.com. Choose between the 18-stem Enchanted Rose Medley for $29.99, or you can upgrade to 24 assorted roses for $10 more. To order, go to 1-800-Flowers.com/ESPN. Plus, you get triple action protection for optimum engine performance with Shell V-Power Nitro Plus premium gasoline. Talking football, the latest on Antonio Brown, where if you're just joining us, he tweeted out that he was saying his goodbyes to the Pittsburgh Steelers, and our very own Adam Schefter is reporting that he has indeed requested a trade. So it seems as if Antonio Brown and the team from the Steel City are going to be heading towards a divorce. So we're talking about that. Also some thoughts on Kyler Murray. We'll get into all the NBA stuff in hour number 2, plus the latest on Bryce Harper and Manny Machado. And again, another slow off season in Major League Baseball with spring training and camps opening up, pitchers and catchers starting to descend upon Florida and Arizona, yet the 2 biggest stars of free agency are still looking for homes, which really is unbelievable. Let's head to the phones, though, and let's say hi to DJ in Virginia. DJ, you're on the Stephen A. Smith Show on ESPN Radio. How are you?
Doing all right, man. Look, I got 2 points, and the first point is a serious point. The second one's kind of practical. And I'm a Raiders fan, but they're both about the Jets and the Giants, right? I really believe my Raiders are going to trade Derek Carr and draft Kyler Murray because I think John Gruden is going to start completely fresh. And I feel like –
I don't think that's crazy, by the way. I really don't think that's crazy. You can make your other point, but look, I mean, haven't you gotten the feeling ever since kind of the midpoint of last season that Derek Carr and John Gruden were not going to be married to each other long term? You just got the sense, look, John Gruden wanted to get rid of everything in Oakland that wasn't bolted to the ground. And I think that Derek Carr fits in that category, and he wants to start over with the quarterback of his choice. And it's, after all, the most important position in team sports. He might as well have his handpicked guy.
Yeah, I think he's trying to adapt to this generation of the NFL. And like you said, like I knew how this season was going to go after he said we need to establish the best. We need to establish the pass rush. After trading the best pass rusher in the league, and then you want to trade Amari Cooper, then it's like nobody's really safe. But my second point is, I really feel like Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown will end up on the Jets. That's just the practical side. I don't think they're going to trade in the conference, but it's like, why not? Why not have both teams in New York, bringing something back to the city? That's all.
Well, I mean, and DJ, thanks for the phone call. I don't know if a team is going to be able to land both of them, much less the Jets. Now, look, there's very few teams that are going to be able to afford both of those guys because of the cap space that you're going to require. Jets, of course, have plenty of it, so they would be one of those. You would think that those are a couple of weapons that the organization would look to surround Sam Darnold with. I got to be honest with you, I wouldn't touch him. I'm iffy at best about the Jets maybe making a run at Le'Veon Bell because, again, this is 2019. How much money do you really want to allocate on a running back in this stage of the game in the NFL? I mean, Saquon Barkley, take him for an example, okay? Saquon Barkley was as good as anybody in the NFL at his position this past year. He won the Rookie of the Year. Guy had over 2,000 yards from scrimmage. He was awesome. Flat out awesome. All right? And the Giants, you cannot fault them for picking him with number 2 overall last year. But what did they win? Right? I mean, and that's the thing, and that's why when we got down to Baker Mayfield versus Saquon Barkley, even for the Rookie of the Year award on the offensive side of the ball, Barkley was great, but did it really make that big of a difference to the Giants in the grand scheme of things? Baker Mayfield, on the other hand, he put up numbers. He was very impressive, and the Browns won 7 games, right? The Browns had only won 1 game the previous 2 years. Browns didn't win a game this year until Baker Mayfield stepped on the field that Thursday night against the Jets in week number 3. And they won 7 games, which to the Browns and Browns fans seems like a 14-win season, just because they haven't known what success is. So that's the thing. I mean, you have somebody like Le'Veon Bell. Yeah, he's good, but do you really want to pay him the kind of money that he's seeking? And after all he cares about is money. That's why he stepped aside and sat out the entire 2018 season, because he didn't have the money that he saw fit for his skill set. So he walked out on his team. He walked out on his teammates. Remember, you had guys in that Pittsburgh Steelers locker room that despised Le'Veon Bell during the season, especially those offensive linemen. Whenever they got questions thrown at them about Le'Veon Bell, they said, why are we talking about this guy? He's not even here. Boy, isn't it ironic, too, that the 2 names that we're talking about here in the NFL, both were Pittsburgh Steelers? And you don't see a lot of guys probably on that football team that are shedding tears, that neither one of them are likely going to be wearing a Steeler uniform once the game kicks off again in the fall. Say hi to Barry in California. Barry, you're on ESPN Radio and ESPN News. How are you?
Hello. Yeah, I just to your point about how much you'd have to give up in a trade for him. Don't you think that the baggage would adjust the market?
You mean like you think you're getting them at a smaller rate because of the baggage?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
You can only get what the teams would give.
I don't think so, Barry. You know why? And I thank you for the phone call, because I do think that there's going to be a team out there that will give up what the Pittsburgh Steelers are asking. They'll pay the high price, because at the end of the day, talent trumps all. Talent and ability and performance is going to outweigh everything else. Look at what just happened yesterday with Kareem Hunt getting signed by the Cleveland Browns. Right? You don't think Kareem Hunt has baggage? You don't think Kareem Hunt has some character flaws? I mean, it's pretty obvious. But the Cleveland Browns said, the heck with that. We didn't even wait for the calendar to go to March. Kareem Hunt has a new team before Manny Machado and Bryce Harper do. That's all you need to know right there, because the guy can play And the guy's still young enough to where he's got a lot of good years left in the National Football League. The heck with what happens off the field. Charles in California is up next. Charles, you're on ESPN Radio, ESPN News. How are you?
I'm fine, and you?
Good, Charles. What's going on?
I just want to comment on the way the Magic handled the release of the trade that it wasn't. He got to realize you had a whole, 2 years, 3 years of guys that you're bringing in, and they're in a losing culture, and they're trying to learn how to win, and they're giving their all, but yet you feel, very insensitive and don't realize what you have.
Well, Charles, you're talking about the Lakers stuff there with the Pelicans and the Anthony Davis and the Magic Johnson comments, and I thank you for the phone call. That's my fault. I should have waited to take that call in the next hour when we do the NBA, and we'll have plenty to say about that. Here's the only thing I'll offer up right now, all right? Magic Johnson needs to take a step back for a second. Take a step back, maybe go on a nice retreat for a week, maybe head to the beach, relax, chill out, because what you're starting to see here is that Magic Johnson, who, in my opinion, okay, the greatest Laker of all time, the greatest Laker of all time with the basketball in his hands as a player, as an executive, and even the cup of coffee he had as a coach, still's got a lot to learn. A lot to learn. All right? Remember you had Magic versus Larry Bird? That was the rival all throughout the 80s, Lakers, Celtics, all those years? All right? At least in terms of coaching / being an executive, Larry Bird is beating Magic Johnson's pants in that category. Okay? Magic needs to chill out here for a second. Let's say hi to Mike in Phoenix. Mike, you're on ESPN Radio and ESPN News.
Hi. I think the Cardinals should trade for Le'Veon Bell for that first-round pick and a offensive lineman. This way it kind of frees up some cap space for the Steelers, gives them $1 million to do with what they want, picks up some cap space from the thing. It helps on your offensive line, and it also gets rid of the Kyler Murray issue.
Wait, say again. So you think the Arizona Cardinals should trade the first overall pick? Is that what you said?
First overall pick for Bell and an offensive lineman, because let's face it, he's not going to go for anything less than a late-round first pick to any other team. And most of the cap space, it'll help you up. What about
David Johnson, Mike? You got David Johnson on your team. If you put some decent pieces around him, David Johnson's still one of the best backs in football. You don't need Le'Veon Bell if you're the Arizona Cardinals. And by the way, and I thank you for the phone call, I mean, thank God, and I say this with all respect in the world, thank God you're not the general manager of my football team. Because if anybody in their right mind trades the number 1 overall pick in the draft for a running back, and I guess you said an offensive lineman too, you know what? Before you even, if I was the owner of that team, before the card was even turned in, I'd already be looking for a new general manager. I mean, that is career suicide. The number 1 pick for a running back and an offensive lineman. You have frequent heartburn, like the kind where you have antacid stashed everywhere in case it pops up. You know what I mean. You keep some in your bag or your desk or your car or your nightstand. You have those chalky tablets ready for whenever and wherever heartburn strikes. Well, listen up. There's an easier way to deal with your heartburn. Prilosec OTC. Just 1 pill a day will last a full 24 hours with 0 heartburn. Kick your antacid habit. It's possible with Prilosec OTC. Use as directed for 14 days to treat frequent heartburn, not for immediate. Our telephone number, 888-729-3776. You can find me on Twitter at Dan Graca, Graca. And the NBA is on ESPN Radio. Tune in tonight as Ben Simmons and the 76ers host the Celtics, presented by Indeed. Coverage begins at 7:30 p.m. Eastern on most ESPN radio stations. Plus, if you miss any of the Stephen A. Smith Show today, go check it out on demand in the Stephen A. Smith Podcast, brought to you by Capital One. Capital One is reimagining banking, offering accounts with no fees or minimums that can be opened in 5 minutes. Capital One, what's in your wallet? Let's go back to the phones and let's say hi to Chris in Pennsylvania. Chris, you're on the Stephen A. Smith Show, ESPN Radio, ESPN News. Hello, Chris.
Hello.
All right, hey, Chris, what's going on?
It's going good, man. Kind of nice to see the Cleveland Browns got a little ahead of the curve and got Kareem.
Yes, they did. Look,
yes, they
bottom
did.
line is, Yes, they did. And look, the bottom line is this, and as we've seen time and time again, whenever you have transactions like what we witnessed yesterday with the Browns, talent trumps all, does it not? And look, you thought that Kareem Hunt was going to get a second chance. You knew he was going to get a second chance here, Chris, okay? The question was when, and maybe it happened a little bit sooner than maybe a lot of us anticipated. But, boy, you talk about if you're Kareem Hunt, you now get to go back and restart your NFL career at a place that was, 20 minutes away from where you went to high school, where you grew up? Couldn't have worked out any better for Kareem Hunt. All right, thanks for the phone call. Let's say hi to Chance in Green Bay. Chance, you're on ESPN Radio and ESPN News. How are you?
Good. How are you doing?
Good, Chance. What's going on?
Hey, quick question about the Green Bay Packers. Do you think it would be wise for us to trade for Antonio Brown or Le'Veon Bell to hide our defensive problems? We got 2 first-round picks, and Rodgers probably has about 3 or 4 good years left in him, bud.
Yeah, I mean, look, Aaron Rodgers still is your franchise. That goes without saying. And clearly you want to give him as much help as humanly possible. And look, the defensive shortcomings you guys have, that's no secret. I would still look to add to that side of the football. The one thing that I would take some stock in if I were the Packers is I like some of those young wide receivers that were developed last year in light of all the other injury issues that took place. You know, giving the young guys the opportunity to play. And I know ultimately it was a disappointing season and he came up short, but I still like some of those skill position guys that got a lot of playing time towards the tail end of 2018. I think that there's some foundation there.
Let's just get Antonio Brown and call it a done deal.
Yeah, but you know what? Here's the problem with that, though, Chance, and thank you for the phone call. Think about how that restricts you moving forward, right? And Green Bay, the philosophy that they've always had, and this was more primarily when Ted Thompson was running the show, okay? But the philosophy that they've always had is take care of your own guys and don't necessarily be overactive on the free agent market when you're talking about bringing in players from other teams around the National Football League. That's never really been that MO, right? That's never been the way that they go about doing business. So I don't think that that is essentially an avenue that they're going to look to go down. Now, there's still time to get a Valentine's bouquet of roses from 1-800-Flowers.com. Get the 18 stem enchanted rose medley for $29.99 or 24 assorted roses for $10 more. To order, go to 1-800-Flowers.com, click the radio icon, and enter code Stephen A. Stan Graca sitting in for Stephen A here on this busy Tuesday on ESPN Radio and ESPN News. We'll have more on the Antonio Brown situation, a little bit more as to whether or not Kyler Murray made the right choice. Plus, we'll sprinkle in the NBA and the MLB here in hour number 2 when we roll on ESPN Radio and ESPN News. This show brought to you by Credit Karma. Get your truly free credit scores and free credit monitoring from Credit Karma today. Credit Karma, get knowing. Plus, ESPN Radio is presented by Progressive Insurance with more than 30 unique coverage options available. Progressive knows small business. Learn more at progressivecommercial.com. Did a lot of football in that first hour with the Antonio Brown latest, Kyler Murray. And we'll get back to it here, of course, throughout the course of the second hour of this program here, but wanted to sprinkle in some NBA, and some congratulations are in order. Number one for Russell Westbrook, who eclipsed the great Wilt Chamberlain. And whenever you make a milestone and you just break the record that was previously held by Wilt Chamberlain, I don't care what it was, okay? Most consecutive games of tying your shoes the right way. If it was Wilt Chamberlain who held that record, you did something right. So congrats to Russ for setting the NBA mark with his 10th straight triple-double. Got that last night, and that's no small feat. On the other hand, you have James Harden, who also rang up his 30th straight game of 30 or more points. Now, look, James Harden, we know that he's one of the best scorers, if not the best scorer in the NBA. But are they always the most efficient ways of where he goes about getting the 30 points? Not necessarily. You know, sometimes the game could be well out of hand. He's still out there on the court, chucking them up, just making sure he gets the 30. Like you saw a little bit last night. He was 9 for 23, which isn't exactly overly flattering. And sometimes he's just hanging on there at garbage time to put up the 30. I think it's way more impressive, and you could tell me differently. I think it's way more impressive when you see a streak of what Russell Westbrook did with even 10 straight triple-doubles, for crying out loud. Because at least when you have a triple-double, it's not only so much about you. Yes, you can score. You're in charge of that. You have a hand in whether or not you can get some rebounds. But to get the assists, you got to make sure that your teammates are up for the game as well, and then they're going to be able to score the basketball. If they do, you get the assist. So I think way more goes into what Russell Westbrook was able to accomplish than even James Harden. And it's funny, too, because everybody that I'm reading some stuff on social media and whatnot. People have short-term memory. They really do. Because the same people that are attacking James Harden, and I'll be fair, I was not one of these guys, but the people that are attacking James Harden for the fact that, it's not exactly clean with him getting the 30 games of 30 points, and it's not efficient necessarily. Those were the same people a couple of years ago who were throwing daggers at Russell Westbrook. Remember when he was trying to average a triple-double for the season the year he won the MVP? And that he was just going out there trying to pad his stats and hanging on in the game so he can have these triple-doubles. Forget about if it was in a winning effort or not. And he was just going out there making sure that he would fill up the stat sheet. You can't kill Russell Westbrook a couple of years ago and then come back and say James Harden is doing things that, we've never seen before. It doesn't work that way. Can't have it both ways. All right, they're both phenomenal players. But I think what Russell Westbrook is doing is way more of a statistical feat. And he's playing on a better basketball team, too, more importantly. And one of the guys who's being overshadowed, in my opinion, maybe because of what Russell Westbrook is doing with that Thunder basketball team, is his cohort there, Paul George, who is having an MVP caliber season. Let me repeat that. An MVP caliber season. 47-point triple-double. And this is a guy who we didn't even think at this stage of the game would even be wearing an Oklahoma City uniform, because it looked like it was just going to be a brief stopover when he got traded there from the Indiana Pacers a couple of years ago. Remember, he was signed, sealed, and delivered to go play out in L.A. How'd that work out? Chalk that one up to Magic Johnson, too. Couldn't even get a meeting, by the way. Couldn't even get a meeting. Paul George has been phenomenal. And I've never been, I'll be honest with you, I've never been the biggest Paul George guy. Not really. But you know what? I'm starting to come around here because I give the guy a ton of credit. He is having a phenomenal impact on this basketball team. And don't look now. You look at this Thunder squad. I mean, is it really a stretch to say, with the way the West is shaping up right now, that maybe when it's all said and done and we get to late May, that the Thunder are going to be the biggest challenger potentially to the Golden State Warriors throne in the Western Conference? I mean, the Denver Nuggets are a great story. They're a phenomenal story, maybe as good a story as we've had in the entire NBA this year. For them to come out of nowhere and to have the year that they're having with relatively little fanfare is tremendous. But I look at that Thunder team, and when push comes to shove, I kind of like their chances a little bit more in the postseason. And you know what? Maybe when it's all said and done, look, they're only a game back. Thunder might get that 2 seed by the time we get to the playoffs, and then they wouldn't have to lock horns with the Warriors until you get to the conference finals. And the funny thing about it, too, is for so long, you've had this disparity between the East and the West. And on the Eastern Conference side, it was always, all right, what team is LeBron James on? Whether it was on Miami, whether it was Cleveland, they would be the team to beat. And then it would be everybody else in the East. Right, Toronto would have some nice seasons, but then once you always got to the playoffs, you knew that they weren't going to be taken seriously. And they usually would spit the bit. Boston Celtics, they had their moments, but they were always crippled by injuries. And then by the time they got to that moment in the playoffs, they weren't able to get the job done. They were low on manpower. Right? So it was just, okay, an eventual coronation again for LeBron James in the NBA Finals. That's not the case so much this year. Well, for one reason is that LeBron James is playing in the West. We know that. But I was thinking about the way even the West is right now. And I think certainly at the top, you have to be a little bit more enthused about the teams that you see in the Eastern Conference versus what you got out West. It's still the Warriors as the team to beat out West. Okay, we all acknowledge that. But look at this Eastern Conference. The Bucks, the Raptors, the 76ers. I'm not going to say the Indiana Pacers, and they have done a phenomenal job this year. Let's give them a bunch of credit. But without Victor Oladipo, and even though they've won 6 in a row, I don't think they're a legitimate suitor for the Eastern Conference Championship. So unfortunately, I have to leave them out. I'm sorry. I hope they prove me wrong. But Milwaukee, Toronto, Philly, And you know what? Maybe if they get their act together here, maybe the Boston Celtics. Now that we've moved on past the trade deadline, the guys who are in that uniform are still going to be in that uniform. Maybe they could finally get their heads together. And unlike what Marcus Morris was saying the other night, how it's a bunch of individuals and they're not pulling for one another as a team. I still think when all is said that they are going to be heard from in these playoffs. But take those 4 teams I just gave you. Bucks, Raptors, Sixers, Celtics, in any particular order. At least the top 3, if you maybe want to move Boston away just because of all the dysfunction they've been going through lately. The 3 teams at top in the Eastern Conference, don't you think that they're better than even who the number 2 team would be considered to be out west? When was the last time we were able to say that? Right? When was the last time we were able to say that the Eastern Conference up top had a little bit more meat to it, a little bit more depth than what we have to see on in the West? So what I'm trying to say is, that if you look at the West, and maybe, if some team, and it might seem like a miracle, but you never know, a lot could happen between now and then. If the Warriors get picked off before the NBA Finals, you know what that means? You might have a team come from the Eastern Conference when we sit down in June to begin the Finals that might be considered the favorite to take home the championship. And it's been a long time. Right? The last time a team that did not have LeBron James on it come from the Eastern Conference, where you were talking about a powerhouse, a championship caliber team, what were we talking about? The Kevin Garnett Boston Celtics? A decade ago? That's a long time ago. But that could be reality. And at the very least, these NBA playoffs, I think on both sides, more so in the East, I think, than in the West, you're going to get some high-caliber basketball. The second round in the Eastern Conference, if chalk holds serve in the first round and you have those top 4 win out, that's going to be a heck of a lot of fun. A heck of a lot of fun. And by the way, the NBA put out a statement a little while ago that they cleared the Lakers, they cleared the Sixers, and any sort of tampering about the whole Ben Simmons, Magic Johnson situation, which I didn't think that there was anything seriously there. I didn't know realistically what was going to happen, but I didn't think that the NBA was going to intervene. All right, if both parties see fit and they don't think that there's going to be any sort of competitive secrets being swung in either direction, you know what? They can have a conversation. That's what the NBA is nowadays, right? Everybody's buddy-buddy. Everybody's friends. So why should we get all bent out of shape if Ben Simmons is going to seek out the advice of Magic Johnson or vice versa? Everybody's trying to help everybody. That's one of the reasons that people are critical of the NBA nowadays, is that it's too nice, right? There aren't any rivalries anymore. There isn't that animosity. You know, guys now after a game are going over to the other bench and they're hugging each other. They're exchanging jerseys. They're, signing jerseys. They're laughing it up. Remember back in the day, you lose a big game and you just walk right off the floor? You're not hugging the guy on the other end of the court, shaking hands, that sort of thing. That's long gone. Long gone. But as I said about Magic Johnson, this is a big summer for the Lakers. A big summer for L.A. All right? The Pelicans did a nice thing. We're leaking out the secrets of the so-called package that they were offering for Anthony Davis because they just wanted to stick it back to the Lakers. Remember, Magic couldn't get a meeting with Paul George. Magic, unfortunately for his sake, he's sitting there taking bows as if he was the guy that got LeBron over to the purple and gold. No. I could have been running the Lakers. LeBron was still going to sign with the team. Okay? That's where his business ventures are. That's where he wanted to be. He was basically signed, sealed, and delivered to L.A. for 2 years leading up to that. Had nothing to do with Magic Johnson. Phenomenal player, as I said, greatest Laker of all time. But as far as an executive is concerned, still leaves a lot to be desired. And it is going to be a big summer for that franchise to be able to continue to mold that into a winner. Remember, the clock is ticking on LeBron James. Clock is ticking. He doesn't have 5-6 years of top-notch, high-level MVP caliber basketball. Guy's played a lot of minutes. Remember, he's been to the finals how many years in a row? That's the equivalent of an extra couple of seasons of basketball. All eyes on L.A. this summer, and New York, for that matter. 888-SAY-ESPN, 888-729-3776. Say hi to CJ in Nashville. CJ, you're on ESPN Radio and ESPN News. What's going on?
Hey, Dan, how you doing?
Good, CJ. What's up?
So I just had a question about Anthony Davis. Do you think there's a chance that the Pelicans are kind of holding on to him and waiting to see who gets the first overall pick and then trading with them to get Zion Williamson? And the reason I'm asking that is because the Pelicans obviously need a lot of fans to stay in New Orleans and not move to Seattle or somewhere else.
Here's the thing. All right, look, the number one pick in the draft is certainly appealing enough. I mean, it's the number one pick, right? I mean, you rule the roost. You have your choice of any guy in this draft. And I know that Zion Williamson is a phenomenal athlete, and he looks to have a very, very bright future. We know that. He's an athletic freak right now, playing on the college basketball level. But let me ask you a question, though. And I know that you're not able to get equal value because Anthony Davis is one of the top 5 players in the NBA, maybe even top 4, if you want to slice it. Do you think that Zion Williamson and he's gotten a ton of hype, but I'm not so sure that Zion Williamson is even as highly regarded a prospect universally by NBA scouts as even Anthony Davis was when he came out of Kentucky. That's the problem I would have with that. So you can say, yeah, they're going to hold on and they want to see who's the number one pick to maybe get that back. But remember, there's no guarantee that Zion is even going to be what Anthony Davis became in the NBA. Top 5 is top 5. That is a lofty standard to get to. And he might be an all-star. He might be really, really good, CJ. But Anthony Davis is special. Special. Outside of LeBron, Kevin Durant, Steph Curry. You know what? Give me Anthony Davis. (888-SAY-ESPN), 888-729-3776. Jay in Pittsburgh. Jay, you're on ESPN Radio and ESPN News. How are you?
How you doing, Dan?
What's up, Jay?
I was just wondering what you think about the Antonio Brown trade. I was wondering if maybe they could make a trade package that included Le'Veon and Antonio. I don't know if you thought about that and maybe what they can get out of Antonio and Le'Veon.
Le'Veon Bell's a free agent. You can't trade him. He's a free agent. So that's not that. You throw that one right out of there because you can't trade a free agent, right? Le'Veon Bell's going to go to the highest bidder, plain and simple. You know, here's the thing is you're the Steelers. All right, and I understand you were able to go through an entire season without Le'Veon Bell playing. And you might think that you were successful. Your offense was okay. James Conner, great story, all that stuff. But you still missed the playoffs. Say what you want. You still missed the playoffs. You might have had a decent season, but you did not finish in the top 6 in the AFC. So it's a failure, in my opinion. Now you're going to have to replace not one, but 2 of the premier players at their positions in the NFL. That's a problem to me. Downey in Colorado. Downey, you're on ESPN Radio. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. What's going on?
I just wanted to talk about the Antonio Brown trade as well. I just wanted to see what you thought about maybe the Cowboys acquiring Antonio Brown just to kind of get more in that explosive, just high-powered offense that the NFL is kind of leading towards now. Even though we did already acquire Amari Cooper just to have another weapon to try and get
Cowboys can't fit him in. Cowboys can't fit him in. They don't have a lot of space. Remember, number one, they got to take care of DeMarcus Lawrence and make sure they keep him around. And chances are they're going to have to franchise him. That's going to cost them a heck of a lot of money. And they don't have a lot of maneuverability in that regard. You know, like you said, the Amari Cooper trade was made. And that's going to be their one big move, I think, at wide receiver. But I don't think that they can financially find a way to keep Antonio Brown or even to fit him under their cap. Plus, what are you going to give up? What do you give up? First-round picks for the next 3-4 years? You can't cut your arm off like that and just completely cripple your drafts for the foreseeable future. That's why, as I started off the show by saying, guys, Antonio Brown's a great player, but you have to be realistic because you can't just give up, half of your organization for him. It's a wide receiver. We're not talking about trading for Aaron Rodgers. We're not talking about trading for, Tom Brady in his prime or something like that. Or a Von Miller in his prime, a game wrecker. A wide receiver is only going to be as good as the guy who's giving him the football. It's not like he's the guy that begins to play with the ball in his hands. That's the issue always when you're talking about these skill position players. Appreciate the phone call. Ray is in Brooklyn. Ray, you're on ESPN Radio and ESPN News. How are you?
What's going on? Listen, I totally agree with you. I mean, we got a Zion as a very good player, but come on, we're talking about Anthony Davis. You got a proven commodity that can bang bodies with adults. This kid is in college. You don't know what he can do against grown adults with money and a contract as a motivation. LeBron was supposed to be killing in high school. He's 6'10", playing with some 9-year-olds, 19, 17-year-olds. They're supposed to kill him. But I totally agree with you. Anthony Davis is the goal.
Ray, that's the bottom. Look, it's the same thing whenever you're talking about in any sport. When you trade prospects, right, or minor leaguers, for example, for proven commodities. It's no different than this. All right, Anthony Davis is a freak. Okay, he's one of the best players in basketball. And I know what people are going to say, well, if he was so good, how come he's only won one playoff series so far in his NBA career? I get it. All right, but some of the best players who have ever put on a pair of sneakers to play in the NBA didn't have postseason success. And it's not all fault on their own. Sometimes they were just part of bad organizations, had nobody around them. Why do you think LeBron James, right? LeBron James, the greatest player in the NBA of this generation. Why do you think LeBron left Cleveland the first time around? Because he didn't think the organization put anything halfway decent around him, except for the one trip he went to the NBA Finals and he got slaughtered that one year by the San Antonio Spurs. And Anthony Davis wants to get the heck out of New Orleans because he's losing faith in the organization. See, to me, that's a problem on a bigger scale. All right, that to me is an issue. I don't even know if we have enough time between now and the top of the hour when we say goodbye. But, I mean, we could do a 3-4 hour show alone on the continued problems that the NBA has to a certain degree in some of these smaller market cities like New Orleans right now and the way that franchise is being run. You have a talent in Anthony Davis, a guy who is, you could count on one hand, the amount of players in the NBA who are better than him. And you don't even need the whole hand. You can keep a couple of those fingers in your pocket if you want. But why does a franchise like that have to part ways with a player like this, a talent as special as Anthony Davis, after how many seasons, before there's even real payoff? Because for a couple of reasons. Number one, the players run the show in the NBA. I think that's obvious. It's been that way for a while. And Anthony Davis is smart enough to read the writing on the wall and say, you know what, I don't think that I can win here. And he's seen a lot of his other colleagues decide to jump ship and go from team to team to team when things aren't working out for them and they want to move on. But if you want this league to grow and if you want some of these smaller franchises to grow and to be able to hang on to their superstars for the betterment of the game, you want to be able to distribute and spread the wealth of the talent base. Do you not? You want to keep a guy like Anthony Davis in a place like New Orleans because at least that franchise is going to be on the map as long as he's there. I mean, what good is it if Anthony Davis is out LeBron in L.A.? Or if he's up in Boston? The Celtics have tradition and history, plus they got some good players on their own. Lakers, same exact thing. Pelicans, Anthony Davis leaves, you could forget about him. Forget about him. If you're in New Orleans, it's, you know what? Wake me when the Saints season kicks off. So we could go complain about the officiating again in the NFC Championship game. That's what the fans are going to be saying there. You know, how soon before Giannis is going to want out of Milwaukee? Don't you think that day is eventually going to come? And it pains for me to say, but these stars always want to be on the move. I mean, I've never thought in a million years that Kawhi Leonard would want his way out of San Antonio because he seemed like he was perfect for that organization until he wanted out and until he butted heads with Popovich. That's something that the NBA needs to correct and to find a way to satisfy. Do I really have to remind you that there's 2 days left until Valentine's? Luckily for you, there's still time to win Valentine's this year with some help from my friends at 1-800-Flowers.com. Right now, You can get the 18-stem Enchanted Rose Medley for $29.99, or you can upgrade to 24 assorted rose. Hanging in with you here for Stephen A. Smith on a busy Tuesday, ESPN Radio and ESPN News. 888-SAY-ESPN is our telephone number, 888-729-3776. You can tweet at me at Dan Graca, Graca. And you know what? There's still time to get a gorgeous Valentine's bouquet of roses from 1-800-Flowers.com. Choose between the 18-stem Enchanted Rose Medley for $29.99, or you can upgrade to 24 assorted roses for $10 more. To order, go to 1-800-Flowers.com, click the radio icon, and enter code Stephen A. You know, it's funny. Pitchers and catchers have reported to spring training both in Florida, Arizona. I can't wait. I can't wait for baseball to start fired up. But this is now the second straight offseason where the free agent market hasn't moved as swiftly as maybe we're accustomed to seeing. And you kind of thought that last year might have been an aberration while we were going through it, because you looked ahead to this offseason and you had two transformative talents, generational type players in Manny Machado and Bryce Harper, who are going to be on the market. These are guys who are only 26 years of age. You're not talking about players who are maybe entering their age 30 season. And if you were maybe reluctant to give them the 10-year deal, well, it would almost be like the Albert Pujols thing all over again, when you're going to be paying for the down years of a player at the back end of that contract, and you would do anything in your power to get out from underneath it. That wasn't the case here, right? Because when you have players that go to free agency this young, even if you were going to fork over a 10-year deal, you're only talking about 35, 36 years of age. And they would still be pretty productive players. Maybe not $30 million a year players at that point, but still fairly productive. So where are we? It's the 12th of February. Manny Machado hasn't signed. Bryce Harper hasn't signed. Within the last week, Bryce Harper took another meeting with a team that he previously hadn't had any dialogue with in the San Francisco Giants. And the puzzling thing about that is you look at the San Francisco Giants, proud franchise, right? 3 world championships in a 5-year period, all within the last decade. But they had an awful season last year. As bad a season as they've had in quite some time. And that's a team that's gotten older. You got Bruce Bochy, their soon-to-be Hall of Fame manager, when he hangs him up on the last year of his contract. Farhan Zaidi now takes over the operations of that franchise. He comes over from the LA Dodgers. If you ask me, San Francisco Giants are best suited to tear this thing down and rebuild a little bit. All right, they got Madison Bumgarner, who has been as clutch a postseason pitcher as we've seen in the last 50 years, maybe all time. But Madison Bumgarner's got a year left on the contract. That, to me, would be a commodity that the ball club would have, that if you want to rebuild, if you want to bring in some young, controllable talent, that's a guy you look to move. So when I saw that they were meeting with Bryce Harper, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Because if you're going to fork over a multi-year deal to Bryce, well, then you're probably hanging on to Madison Bumgarner and you're stalling whatever rebuild or retool that you're going to have in store. Now, here's the problem, though, when you look at it from Bryce Harper's standpoint. Giants say that they don't want to go to a long-term deal. They're more interested in a short-term contract with high AAV, which I could totally appreciate. And you know what? That might have to be an alternative route that he and or Manny Machado have to explore. And the reason, let's make no mistake about it, let's clear up some misconceptions here, okay? The reason that Bryce Harper and Manny Machado are still free agents is because they have not gotten a contract that they see satisfactory. Okay, which means no team has ponied up to the point where they would say, all right, I'll take it. That's good enough for me. They haven't gotten the 8, 9, 10-year deal worth $300 million, which for the last couple of years, most so-called experts thought that it would be a foregone conclusion that they were going to receive. All right. So what does the short-term deal do for you if you're Bryce Harper? And let's just say it's with the San Francisco Giants. That, to me, would almost be like career suicide. And I don't think that Bryce Harper wants to explore that route. And his agent, Scott Boras, probably is also smart enough to tell him, hey, Bryce, that's probably not an avenue that you want to explore. Let's say Bryce Harper, just for argument's sake, he takes a 1-year deal with the Giants for $40 million. Gets the high AAV. He'll be the highest per-year player in baseball. And then he has to go back out on the market and do this whole thing again next year. Why would you do that in San Francisco? That ballpark out there, which is now Oracle Park, has never been a hitter's ballpark, save for one guy named Barry Bonds, and we're not going to get into what made him successful all those years hitting out there. But it's one of the worst hitters' ballparks in baseball. If Bryce Harper signs with that team and he plays 81 games in that ballpark this year, what is he going to do? He's going to bat 270. He's going to hit maybe 18 home runs and drive in, 78, 80 runs? And then he's going to go back out on a free agency next year with those numbers and hope to get another $300 million contract from somebody when he couldn't get it this time around? No way. So, I mean, the Giant fans could sit there and the organization could think that, oh, yeah, that's going to be an alternative for us. But why would you do that if you're Bryce Harper? It makes no sense. I still think when it's all said and done, he might not get a 10-year deal, but I think Harper signs with the Philadelphia Phillies. I believe that. He already turned down $300 million supposedly from the Nationals at the tail end of last season. I think he goes to Philadelphia, and now the Phils can finally follow up on their promise to spend stupid money like the owner said that they were inclined to do at the beginning of this offseason. Manny Machado, on the other hand, we've heard these rumblings about an offer from the Chicago White Sox. Maybe that it's not quite up to $200 million, and maybe he's dragging his feet a little bit. Remember, Manny, if he had his druthers, he would go play for the Yankees. That's what he wants to do. But the Yankees aren't interested. Yankees don't want him, at least not for that money. So I think Manny's going to end up in Chicago. He's not going to win right away. But Machado might be the guy that for the Chicago White Sox, with all the young talent that they have and the young talent that they have coming up through the minor leagues, he might be that guy to where other free agents say, all right, Machado went to Chicago. Let me go there and help him and help make this team a winner here sooner rather than later. But it's a problem for baseball again. You have respected veterans, accomplished players like Justin Verlander tweeting out saying that the system is broken right now. You've got two players entering the prime of their careers, and they can't get paid. If they can't get paid, who will? If they can't get a big money, 8-9-year deal, who can? Nolan Arenado is the prize free agent on the market next offseason. Well, that's why you've already heard talks that Nolan Arenado and the Colorado Rockies are maybe getting closer or at least making some progress towards an extension. Because Arenado says to himself, you know what? I don't want to be like these guys. And I never thought the Rockies would be able to afford Arenado. But if they're going to give him $200 million, if I'm Nolan, I take it. Because that money might not be out there in droves like it once was in baseball. Mike Trout, who is the best player in the sport, right? He's a free agent in a couple of years. Philadelphia probably has designs of plucking him away from the Angels and bringing him back home to Philly. Maybe they're saving their pennies for that. But even a guy like Mike Trout, who's been the best player of this generation, you know how many times he's been to the postseason, guys? One time. 3 games. Good morning, good afternoon, good night. Goodbye. Mike Trout was out of the postseason as fast as he was in it. Baseball's not like the NBA. You bring LeBron James onto your team, you're going to win. Right? One guy makes the difference. You bring Kevin Durant to your team, you'll win. Baseball takes an army. Takes an army. But something's got to give here with the economics of the sport. You could say the teams and owners and executives are getting wiser and smarter, and they don't want to pay for declining production at the back end of some of these contracts. Look, I know the Angels have to overpay for Pujols. We get it. The Tigers rewarded Miguel Cabrera because he was the best hitter of his generation, and he was a Triple Crown winner. But now you look at what's left on that contract, it's horrendous. But then you also have deals like Chris Davis and the Baltimore Orioles. I mean, really? See how bad Chris Davis was last year? You know how much money that's left on that deal? And the Orioles would do anything to get out from underneath that? I mean, look at the Mariners. I mean, the Mariners were able to unload the Robinson Cano deal in the trade with the Mets, but they had to kick in arguably the best closer in baseball, Edwin Diaz, to make it see fit. The Marlins were able to unload the Giancarlo Stanton contract to the Yankees, but push comes to shove, if the Yankees had a do-over, they probably wish they hadn't taken that thing on, and they would have went and signed Bryce Harper or Manny Machado. 888-SAY-ESPN, 888-729-3776. Say hi to Wallace in California. Wallace, you're on the Stephen A. Smith Show, ESPN Radio, ESPN News. How are you?
I'm good. How are you today?
Good, Wallace. What's going on?
So I got my little question. You know, I've been, tuned into the Lakers and their situation on what they got going on. I like the young core, but when it comes to professional basketball, I just feel like that young core is not to be babied. Like if you had Michael Jordan on your team and Scottie Pippen was playing like Lance Stevenson, I feel like he would set his tone. I don't want these guys here if they're not going to be committed. And I feel like LeBron has
but Lance Stevenson isn't young, right, Wallace? I mean, Lance Stevenson is a veteran at this stage of the game. I don't think we can call him a young player.
Yeah, no, he's definitely not young. But as well as any player in the NBA, after 2 to 3 years, if you haven't hit your peak of knowing what you want to do or knowing what you got to finesse your style. So if you're a good shooter, if you're a good perimeter player, if you're a good defender, you got to go to that. And I feel like these young players are waiting for some all-star to tell them what to do when they should just step up and take the lead. So when Anthony Davis talks to town, you should just put on your big boy pants and say, like, I'm going to step up instead of saying I'm scared that I'm going to get traded. And I just feel like the Lakers are a household name. And for the past 4 years, we've been in the back burner.
Well, here's the thing. And Wallace, thank you for the phone call. I appreciate it. I think that because of what the Lakers did the first couple of months of the season. And remember, when they beat the Warriors on Christmas night, right when LeBron went down with the groin injury, what were they, 4th in the West? Right? I mean, they were right there in the middle of the pack. But I think that gave people a false sense of security about what this team really is. All right, even though LeBron went and signed with them, this wasn't a championship caliber team. Yeah, it's a playoff team. You would have thought that, all right, we have LeBron. We could slide into the playoffs even in the West. But I think that maybe you got ahead of yourself a little bit. Just because of that start they got off to. Then he missed however many games it was, however many weeks it was, and then they've come back to the pack a little bit here. And now everybody's being critical of the way that they've gone about their business. And, hey, if the Lakers make the playoffs this year, I think that's the goal. Even if you're the 8th seed. Now, look, if you're the 8th seed, you got to go up against Golden State. You don't want that to happen. Even if you could scooch up even into the 7th, give those young guys, even some of them that are still going to be on this team next year and not shuttled off someplace else, you want to give them at least the postseason experience. Next season, after you reload in the summertime, that's when the Lakers are going to be expected to make some noise in the Western Conference. Not what they do this year, even with LeBron James on their team. When you're hiring, you don't want to waste time sorting through dozens of irrelevant resumes. You want an efficient way to get to a short list of qualified candidates. That's why you need Indeed.com. Post a job in minutes, set up screener questions based on your job requirements, then zero in on qualified candidates using an intuitive online dashboard. Discover why 3 million businesses use Indeed for hiring. News, 888-STAY-ESPN is our telephone number, 888-729-3776. You can tweet at me at Dan Graca, Graca. And you know what? If you missed any of the Stephen A. Smith show today, go check it out on demand in the Stephen A. Smith podcast, brought to you by Capital One. Capital One is reimagining banking, offering accounts with no fees or minimums that can be opened in 5 minutes. Capital One, what's in your wallet? Jeff is in Florida. He's got a shot here on ESPN Radio and ESPN News. Hey, Jeff.
The reason why Machado and Harper are not getting signed is because when the hitter decide to allow players to get suspended for steroids, that changed the age gap. Because Manny Ramirez took a lot of steroids, David Ortiz could. If the hitters would not have signed that policy, I really believe they would sign these players, because you saw what Manny Ramirez did in L.A. He hit over 500 home runs. David Ortiz had a 3-0 comeback, and I really believe that. And it gave the advantage to the hitters. And I think that's when it seems to turn the hitters. And thanks, man. Have a good day.
Well, Jeff, here's the thing, though, and I thank you for the phone call. Look, the steroid era was a thing for a period of time in Major League Baseball. Nobody's denying that. But you mean to tell me that what Bryce Harper has accomplished so far in his career, the raw talent, the tools that he has, same with Manny Machado, that was aided by any performance-enhancing drugs? Nobody's saying that. You know, you look at the guys now in Major League Baseball who are, Mike Trout, like we said, best player of his generation. I mean, if you're a big sabermetrics guy and you go by all that stuff, I mean, you compare Mike Trout's WAR or some of those analytical statistics with some of the greats all time who've ever played this game. I mean, immortals, like Mount Rushmore type players. That's got nothing to do with PEDs. I don't think that necessarily has turned off these owners in any way, shape, or form, or, said that I'm not going to pay players just because guys we got burned in the past because performance-enhancing drug users maybe were corrupting the game. Let's say hi to Amos in Long Island. He'll close us out here. Amos, you're on ESPN Radio. How are you?
Hey, what's up, brother? How's everything?
What's up? What's up, Amos? How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm on my way to the job. I'm on my way to the job right now. But I got three things that I want to say real quick because I know you pressed for time. Number
one, 30
seconds.
Go ahead.
Lakers, it's all about LeBron. So they'll get you gonna get rid of 5 young players just to bring in one guy. It's all about LeBron. Whatever LeBron wants, LeBron is gonna get. Number 2, I'm a diehard Knicks fan. I don't know what kind of progress they're making, but they losing games. It's becoming lousy over there. And you get rid of Porzingis. I love that guy. All Knicks fans love that guy. You should have kept him.
Amos, I got to let you go. We got to